Hi, my name is Hayden Jackson, and today I'm doing a little presentation on the use of EQ and why it's so important. Um, I currently have placed above me a stream of my computer where I have a session open that I recorded recently, and I'm going to be demonstrating the importance of EQ through these tracks that I've recorded recently. So first things first, what is the importance of EQ and why is it so essential to an audio engineer's job? And the most important part of it is just to wrangle frequencies, essentially. Control them to be how you wanted them to sound. Um, Sometimes this can be done through due to wanting to problem solve something. Let's say you messed up in the recording process, you didn't mic it correctly, and now you want to go and do some course correction. Or you can go the opposite way and just use it creatively. Sometimes there's uses of an EQ that are completely creative and wasn't anything you could have done during the actual production. It's just part of a stylistic choice. And both of these options are going to be something that you will see a lot in the field because every artist is very different, and also you're always going to make some mistakes, and even if they're not mistakes, they might just be something that sounds better later. So for example, I have some guitar tracks right here. I'm putting this over our lead guitars. Now currently they sound like this. So I'll actually turn it up a little bit and I'll solo this. So you can hear that there's a lot of low end. Now Pro Tools does not have a visualizer that comes along with the EQ, but you can hear it. You can hear that it has a lot of low end with it, and it's it's not the best to hear. You might want to highlight it a little bit, but what we can do is we can take the EQ and cut out certain parts. So for guitars, a lot of the times, I'm just going to do a general cut, but you will cut a little bit out of the middle just to make it sound a little bit better, because another thing that's so important with EQ is space. If you get really in depth with it, you'll know that certain guitar or certain instruments in general have certain ranges that they occupy, and you want those ranges to be highlighted in each, but every instrument is going to be battling a little bit. Just because certain instruments have their kind of like normal ranges doesn't mean they don't bleed into other things. For example, a piano covers a really, really large range, and depending on the piece, it will stay into one area, but it'll still be spanning across. So you want to give every instrument its own little space, that way so you can hear it, pick it apart clearly. And no matter what you want to do with an EQ, it can always be important to understand that aspect. So when you're looking at EQ, we can go and look at this guitar again, and now we've cut a little bit of the mids out. This is just a general, like, not really accurate thing, but see, to me, that already sounds a little bit clearer. Even if it is just like a random, cut. And you can tell because we've cut out some of these mids, and some of these mids can end up droning in a mix. So even though, this still has its low end from the effects that the artist put on the guitar, but, it doesn't sound as muddy. Now, granted, there's a lot more that we could do to this, but that's just the basics of this. Correct usage of EQ can be whatever you really want it to be. But essentially with an EQ, if you set out to do something with it and you achieve it, then in my opinion, I think that that's a correct use of it. I will say one thing you can do with EQs is you can get a little too extreme with it. You can start doing things just kind of willy-nilly and, being like if you go onto this bass track over here, let's say, which currently sounds, I'll solo it real quick, sounds like this. Now there's some EQ I want to do to this, but I'm actually pretty proud of that, the way that sounds. But if we bust out the EQ, if you're like, oh, well, this is bass, so let's just boost the bass on here. It might not be too noticeable right now, but the point is that, doing something dramatic like that typically isn't the best way to go about it. And you'll end up muddying up all of your other tracks. If your goal with EQ is to create space, that is one of the worst things that you can do, is just be random with your EQ. And sometimes if that's all you're trying to do, sometimes things don't need EQ. You don't always need to put an EQ on everything. Now, tonal and creative differences from whatever band you're recording is a completely separate topic, but just going from that end, there's a lot of restraint that you have to have with EQ, because you can get carried away and just screw a lot of things up. The gear that's typically associated with EQ is both simple and complicated, because EQ, what it does is it's just dealing with frequencies, right? It's changing different ranges. So if you want to just say, well, what's associated with an EQ? Well, an EQ is. I mean, that's the main one. I mean, if you look here, but you also got some other ones. Like, let's just, pick another one. Graphic EQs. See, this one's a little different. Graphic EQs are slightly different from what we were just looking at. They just have specific ranges. Point is, though, an EQ is an EQ at the end of the day. However, what an EQ does can span into almost any other plugin that you have. Frequencies encapsulate a lot of the audio engineer's toolkit. So, even if you take a compressor and throw a compressor on here, that's going to change your frequencies a little bit. They can, and a lot of creative instruments or creative plugins, such as like reverb or compression, can also very, very rapidly change the tone of something. So you can use EQ to kind of tone that down, but in a sense, EQ is also a part of that. So it can be a lot of things, but the main thing when you're thinking of an EQ is just an equalizer, which is this. You'll see multiple bands. You'll see a Q, which just shows how big your, well, that's not a good example, how big your range is. So if you want to boost all of that, which you probably don't want to do, but you can do stuff like that. Then you have your frequency, which just picks where the frequency is, and then the gain. You also have stuff like a high-pass filter, which cuts some lows, and then you also have a low-pass filter, which cuts some highs. It's just the opposite terminology there, and those have very similar options as well. So that's the main thing with there. And I definitely want to show off this specific use for it. Now I want to show what an EQ can actually do here. So this was on that lead guitar earlier. So again, just random edits at a time, but we want to solo this. Take out the bass down here. Solo this. We could just destroy it if we want. And you can add some clarity there. I like, personally, to add some highs to the guitar, depending on what it is. I think it makes it cut through a little bit better, especially when your guitars are going to be really important. And you notice a lot with like newer music, I feel like there's an emphasis on these higher ranges. They sound crisp, they sound nice. I think it's somewhat to do with the technology of the time. Like now we have speakers and that are able to actually capture that, and they don't sound good. Like if you notice, like older recordings always sound like lower in range. Like they kind of like, it's almost like there is a low pass filter on every single thing. New recordings don't do that. If you listen to modern music, you'll hear a lot of stuff in the higher end, and I feel like it just, one, it's easier to discern between a bass and a maybe like some electronic keys or something. It's easier to discern that for the listener, but also they just sound good. I think most people would agree that that higher pitches are sometimes come off a bit more clear and a bit more interesting. But yeah, so we could bust that up, and then we could turn that down, and then if we turn it down here again. I wouldn't want to actually do this on my, if I send this back to the client, they'd probably be confused and annoyed that I didn't put much time. But, trying to visualize that, I cut out some low end here, and that gives me some low end I could throw on the bass here. So now let's put both of those together. So the bass still isn't really that noticeable, although when you cut it out, you can definitely tell. But in the moment, not too different. And some of that could come into finding specifically where that pluck is on the bass and turning that up a little bit, and that could help each bass come in. You can also do some other things to highlight what you've done with the EQ, like sidechaining some compression to make the bass turn down the guitar a little bit if you wanted to. But in general, there's a ton of stuff you can do with EQ. I would argue EQ is one of the most important plugins that a audio engineer has at their disposal, and I think that there's a lot you can do with it. You can do things very basically like I did, or you can, rule break a little bit. You can have every part of the song occupy the same frequency. If you've noticed some like lo-fi sounding songs, sometimes they either sound like they lost a lot of their low end, or that they gained a lot of low end, and it's almost like you're listening to it from another room. In this class, we've been having trainings where it'll play specifically, like a note from like 500 or 1K or something, and you can discern them. That's kind of done with an EQ. Like, you can do that on your own. You can look at the bass track, set the Q kind of low, and just hear what it sounds like when you slide this across. So that's on the, hold on. So you can see, like here, it kind of sounds like it's like through a tin can or something. And then that sounds like a bass without any of the bass. And then that sounds like barely any pluck. So those are the basics of an EQ and a decent demonstration of them. I hope that that helps everybody learn what an EQ is on somewhat of a deeper level. Thank you.